Let me ask you something. What would you do if a complete stranger walked up to you in the middle of the night, offered you $5,000 in cash to help them bury something in the woods, and refused to tell you what was inside? Would you take the money, or would you walk away? Daniel Torres made his choice on a rainy October night in 2003. He took the money, he grabbed a shovel, and he buried a locked metal box deep in the Pennsylvania woods. For 16 years, he tried to forget about it, until the day he turned on the news and discovered who that stranger really was, and what she'd made him bury. This is that story. He helped a stranger bury a secret years later. He realized who she really was. Have you ever made a split-second decision that changed your entire life? A choice so seemingly insignificant at the time, yet so profound in its consequences that it haunts you for years? This is the story of Daniel Torres, a man who helped a complete stranger bury something in the woods one rainy October night. What he thought was an act of simple kindness turned into something far more complex, something that would connect him to a mystery spanning decades and reaching into the highest echelons of power. This is a story about secrets, about the weight of the past, and about how a single moment of compassion can ripple through time in ways we never imagine. It was October 15th, 2003. Daniel Torres was 28 years old, working as a freelance carpenter in rural Pennsylvania, driving home after a long day repairing a barn outside of town. The rain had started around sunset, and by 9 p.m. it was coming down in sheets, the kind of rain that makes you question whether you should even be on the road. Daniel wasn't the type to get involved in other people's business. He kept to himself mostly, preferred the company of wood and tools to the complications of human relationships. His friends, what few he had, would describe him as reliable, quiet, the kind of guy you'd want helping you move, but maybe not the first person you'd call for a night out. That night, as he navigated the winding country road that led back to his small cabin, his headlights caught something unusual. A car, a black sedan, was pulled off to the side of the road, hazard lights blinking weakly through the rain. Standing next to it was a woman, drenched, waving her arms frantically. Daniel's first instinct was to keep driving. It was late, it was isolated, and he'd heard enough true crime stories to know that stopping for strangers in the middle of nowhere wasn't always the smartest move. But something made him slow down. Maybe it was the desperation in her movements, or maybe it was just that he couldn't live with himself if he drove past someone who genuinely needed help. He pulled over. As Daniel stepped out of his truck, the rain immediately soaked through his flannel shirt. The woman rushed toward him, and in the brief illumination from his headlights, he could see she was probably in her 60s, well-dressed despite being soaked, with silver hair plastered to her face and eyes that held a mixture of fear and determination. "Thank God," she said, her voice hoarse. "Please, I need your help. I need it desperately." Daniel noticed immediately that something was off. Her car wasn't damaged. The tires looked fine. There was no smoke, no obvious mechanical failure. "What's wrong?" he asked, rain dripping from the brim of his baseball cap. "I need help burying something," she said directly, without preamble or explanation. Daniel blinked, certain he'd misheard her over the sound of the rain. "You need what?" "I need to bury something. In the woods. Right now. Tonight." Her eyes locked onto his with an intensity that was almost unsettling. "I'll pay you $5,000. Cash. Right now. $5,000. That was more than Daniel made in 2 months. His mind immediately went to his cabin's leaking roof, the truck that needed new brakes, the credit card debt he'd been chipping away at for years. "What are we burying?" he asked cautiously. "A box," she said. "A metal box. It's not heavy. And it's nothing illegal, I promise you that. I just need it buried, somewhere no one will find it. And I need someone with a strong back and a shovel to help me do it." Daniel studied her face. Despite the bizarre nature of her request, she didn't look crazy. She looked scared, yes, but also resolute. There was something almost aristocratic about her bearing, even drenched and desperate on a country road. "Why me?" Daniel asked. "Why not hire someone? Do this properly?" "Because I don't have time," she said. "And because I need someone who doesn't know who I am." Someone who has no reason to care about what's in this box or why it needs to be hidden. Daniel should have said no. Every rational part of his brain was screaming at him to get back in his truck and drive away. But something about the situation intrigued him. And truthfully, $5,000 was $5,000. "Show me the box," he said. She led him to the trunk of her sedan. Inside was a metal box, maybe 2 feet long and a foot wide, with a combination lock securing it shut. It looked old, the metal scratched and dented, with what might have been rust or might have been something else darkening its corners. "What's inside?" Daniel asked. "That's not part of our agreement," she said firmly. "You help me bury this, you get your money, and we never speak of this night again. That's the deal." Daniel grabbed the box. It was heavy, but not impossibly so. Maybe 30 pounds. It rattled slightly when he moved it, something shifting inside. Papers, maybe, or smaller boxes. The woman produced a flashlight and a shovel from her back seat, along with a thick envelope that Daniel assumed contained the money. "There's a trail about 50 yards up the road," she said. "It leads into state forest land. We need to go at least a quarter mile in and bury this somewhere memorable enough that I can find it again if I need to, but obscure enough that no one else will stumble across it." They drove his truck up the road, parked, and began their trek into the woods. The rain had softened to a drizzle, but the ground was slick with mud and fallen leaves. The woman, despite her age, moved with surprising agility, her flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. After about 20 minutes of walking, they found a suitable spot, a small clearing marked by a distinctive split oak tree. Its trunk forked about 6 feet up in a way that looked almost like a Y. "Here," she said. "This is perfect." Daniel began to dig. The ground was soft from the rain, which made the work easier, but after 15 minutes, his arms were burning, and he was covered in mud up to his elbows. The woman watched him work, never offering to help, but never looking away either. When the hole was about 4 feet deep, she nodded. "That's enough." Together, they lowered the box into the hole. As Daniel began shoveling the dirt back, the woman did something unexpected. She pulled a small camera from her coat pocket and took a picture of the split oak tree, the flash momentarily blinding in the darkness. "For reference," she explained. When the box was buried and the dirt tamped down, the woman scattered leaves over the disturbed earth until it looked almost natural. Then she turned to Daniel and handed him the envelope. "Count it if you want," she said. Daniel opened it. $50 bills, crisp and new. He'd never held that much cash in his life. "What's your name?" he asked. "It's better if you don't know," she said. "And it's better if I don't know yours. What happened here tonight, it never happened. Do you understand?" Daniel nodded slowly. "Why are you doing this?" For the first time that night, the woman's stern composure cracked slightly. "Because some secrets are too dangerous to keep close, but too important to destroy. Because I'm protecting people I love. And because sometimes, the only way to survive is to bury the past and hope it stays buried." She extended her hand, and Daniel shook it. Her grip was firm, her skin cold from the rain. "Thank you," she said. "You've done a good thing tonight, even if you don't understand why." They walked back to the road in silence. The woman got into her sedan, started the engine, and drove away without another word, her taillights disappearing into the rainy night. Daniel stood there for a long moment, the envelope of cash heavy in his pocket, wondering what the hell he'd just gotten himself into. Daniel tried to forget about that night. He really did. He used the money to fix his roof, repair his truck, and pay off his credit cards. He told himself it was just a weird encounter, a strange woman with stranger needs, and that it was best left in the past. But the truth was he couldn't forget. Late at night, when sleep wouldn't come, he'd find himself wondering what was in that box. Documents? Money? Something more sinister? And who was that woman? Why had she chosen that particular spot, that particular night? He drove past the forest entrance a few times in the months that followed, always slowing down, always tempted to park and hike back to that split oak tree and dig up whatever they'd buried. But he never did. A deal was a deal, and something about the woman's desperation that night made him feel like disturbing that box would be a violation of trust. life went on. Daniel took on more carpentry jobs, eventually starting his own small business. He met Sarah, a teacher at the local elementary school, and they started dating. 3 years after that night in the woods, they got married. 2 years after that, their daughter Emma was born. Daniel became a different person, more settled, more content. The memory of that rainy October night faded, becoming less a vivid recollection and more like a strange dream he'd once had. Then came September 2019, 16 years after that night in the woods. Daniel was 44 years old now, running a successful carpentry business, with a loving wife and a teenage daughter. He was eating breakfast, half watching the morning news, when a story came on that made his coffee cup freeze halfway to his lips. The anchor's voice was somber. "We begin this morning with the passing of former Senator Victoria Ashford, who died yesterday at her home in Virginia at the age of 82. Senator Ashford served 3 terms representing Virginia in the United States Senate and was known for her fierce advocacy for education reform and veterans' rights." The screen showed footage of Senator Ashford at various points in her career. Younger, commanding podiums with authority, shaking hands with presidents, cutting ribbons at school openings. And then they showed a more recent photo taken maybe a year or 2 before her death. Daniel's blood ran cold. It was her, the woman from that rainy night. Older, yes, frilier, but unmistakably the same person. The same aristocratic bearing, the same intense eyes, the same set to her jaw. Sarah noticed his expression. "Dan, you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." "I know her," Daniel whispered. I met her. Years ago." "Senator Ashford? When?" Daniel's mind was racing. "Long time ago, just briefly." The news continued, detailing Senator Ashford's distinguished career, her rise from a Virginia prosecutor to state representative to U.S. Senator. They mentioned her husband, James Ashford, a prominent banker who had died in 1998. They mentioned her 2 children, both successful in their own right, her son a federal judge, her daughter a renowned surgeon. And then the anchor said something that made Daniel's entire body go rigid. Senator Ashford's career was not without controversy. In 2002, she was investigated by the Senate Ethics Committee regarding allegations of insider trading and improper influence over defense contracts. Though she was ultimately cleared of all charges, the investigation was considered a dark mark on an otherwise exemplary career. Senator Ashford always maintained her innocence and never spoke publicly about the investigation after its conclusion. The investigation ended in 2002. Daniel had met her in October 2003, just a year later. Daniel couldn't concentrate on work that day. He kept seeing that metal box in his mind, kept wondering what was inside. Evidence related to the investigation? Documents that would have destroyed her reputation? Financial records? That evening, after Emma went to bed, Daniel told Sarah everything. He'd never mentioned that night to anyone, had kept it locked away like his own secret. But now, with the woman dead and the memory flooding back with vivid clarity, he needed to tell someone. Sarah listened without interrupting, her expression shifting from confusion to concern to something approaching disbelief. "Dan," she said when he finished, "you buried evidence for a U.S. senator?" "I didn't know who she was," Daniel protested. "And I don't know that it was evidence. She said it wasn't illegal. And you believed her?" "I wanted to believe her." Daniel ran his hands through his hair, graying now at the temples. "God, Sarah, what if I helped her cover up something terrible? What if whatever's in that box proves she was guilty? Or," Sarah said slowly, "what if it proves she was innocent? You said the investigation cleared her. Maybe the box contains proof of that, proof she wanted hidden because it implicated someone else, someone powerful." Daniel hadn't considered that possibility. "Should I go to the authorities? And tell them what? That 16 years ago, you helped bury something in the woods for a woman you now realize was a senator? That you were paid $5,000 to do it? You could be charged with obstruction of justice, conspiracy, who knows what else. So I just do nothing?" "I'm not saying that." Sarah took his hand. "I'm saying we need to think about this carefully. You have a family now, Dan. A business, a reputation. Whatever's in that box, it's been buried for 16 years. Maybe it should stay that way, but Daniel couldn't let it go. Over the next few weeks, he researched everything he could find about Senator Victoria Ashford. The more he learned, the more complex the picture became. Senator Ashford had been a formidable figure in American politics. Born Victoria Hammond in 1937 to a working-class family in Richmond, she'd worked her way through law school, becoming one of the few female prosecutors in Virginia in the 1960s. She'd built a reputation for being tough but fair, taking on cases that others avoided, particularly those involving corruption and organized crime. Her rise to the Senate had been meteoric. In 1988, she ran on a platform of government accountability and education reform, winning by a landslide. She served with distinction, sitting on powerful committees, advocating tirelessly for her constituents. The 2001 to 2002 investigation had nearly destroyed her. The allegations were serious: that she'd used classified information obtained through her position on the Armed Services Committee to make stock trades, and that she'd influenced the awarding of defense contracts to companies that had made substantial donations to her campaign. The investigation had been intense, involving the FBI, the Ethics Committee, and eventually the Justice Department. Senator Ashford had cooperated fully, surrendering her financial records, testifying for hours before committees, submitting to interviews and depositions. In the end, the investigation concluded there was insufficient evidence to prove wrongdoing. The suspicious stock trades could be explained by publicly available information. The defense contracts had been awarded through proper channels. The donations, while large, were legal. Senator Ashford was cleared, but the damage was done. She announced she wouldn't seek re-election in 2004, citing a desire to spend more time with her family. She'd lived quietly after leaving the Senate, occasionally giving speeches, writing opinion pieces, but mostly staying out of the public eye. Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that he needed to know what was in that box. It wasn't just curiosity anymore. It was a need for closure, for understanding. He'd carried this secret for 16 years, and now that the woman was dead, it felt like the weight of it was crushing him. He discussed it with Sarah again, late one night in November. "I need to know," he said. "I need to see what we buried." "And if it's something incriminating?" Sarah asked. "If it proves she was guilty, what then?" "Then at least I'll know the truth, and then I can decide what to do with it." Sarah was quiet for a long time. Finally, she said, "I think you need to talk to someone first. A lawyer maybe. Someone who can advise you on the legal implications." Daniel shook his head. "No lawyers. Not yet. First, I need to see what's in the box. Then I'll figure out what to do." He waited until late November, when the weather turned cold and crisp, when the leaves had fallen and the forest would be easier to navigate. He told Sarah he was going on a hiking trip, needed to clear his head. She didn't believe him, but she didn't stop him either. Daniel returned to those woods on a cold Saturday morning. He'd brought GPS coordinates he'd recorded in his phone years ago, back when he'd first thought about returning. He'd also brought a quality shovel, work gloves, and a backpack. Finding the spot was easier than he'd expected. The split oak tree was still there, larger now, its forked trunk even more distinctive. The forest around it had grown denser, but the basic landscape was the same. Daniel began to dig. The ground was harder than it had been that rainy night, frozen in places, and his progress was slow. After an hour, his shovel struck something metal. His heart racing, he cleared the dirt away until the box was exposed. It looked exactly as he remembered it, maybe a bit more rusted, the combination lock still secure. Daniel tried to pry it open with a crowbar he'd brought, but the lock held firm. Finally, he just lifted the entire box out of the hole and placed it in his backpack. He filled in the hole, scattered leaves over it, and hiked back to his truck. The box sat in his passenger seat as he drove home, a silent presence filled with secrets. Back at his workshop, with Sarah standing beside him, Daniel used bolt cutters to break the lock. His hands were shaking as he lifted the lid. Inside were documents, hundreds of pages, organized in folders with labeled tabs. There were also several USB drives, a small notebook filled with handwritten notes, and a sealed letter addressed simply, "To whoever finds this." Daniel opened the letter first. The handwriting was elegant, precise. "If you're reading this, I'm dead, and someone has found what I hoped would stay buried forever. My name is Victoria Ashford. By the time this is discovered, you likely know who I was and what I was accused of. I want you to know the truth. In 2001, I discovered that my husband, James, had been involved in a massive corruption scheme involving defense contracts, insider trading, and bribery. The evidence was incontrovertible. He'd been using my position, my access, to enrich himself and a network of associates. When I confronted him, he suffered a massive heart attack and died. I was left with a choice: expose his crimes and destroy our family's reputation, hurt our children, and potentially face criminal charges myself as an accessory, or hide the evidence and hope the investigation would find nothing. I chose to hide it. I surrendered my own financial records, cooperated fully with the investigation, knowing that without the evidence in this box, they would find nothing connecting me to James's crimes. And they didn't. But I couldn't destroy this evidence. These documents implicate powerful people, people who are likely still in positions of authority. James's co-conspirators, men who profited from corruption and continue to hold influence. I buried this box because I was afraid of what these people might do if they knew I had this evidence. Afraid of what it would do to my children if they learned their father was a criminal. Afraid of spending my final years in legal battles and scandal. I lived with this burden for years. The guilt of my silence, the fear of discovery, the knowledge that by protecting my family, I was letting guilty men go free. If you found this, the choice is now yours. You can do what I was too weak to do. Bring this evidence to light, ensure these men face justice. Or you can rebury it, let sleeping dogs lie, and carry the burden as I did. I won't tell you which choice is right. That's not my place. All I can tell you is that the truth is in these pages. And the truth, however painful, is always worth something. Victoria Ashford. Daniel and Sarah spent the next week going through the documents. What they found was staggering. The box contained evidence of a conspiracy involving not just James Ashford, but 3 senators, 2 Pentagon officials, and executives from 4 major defense contractors. The scheme was sophisticated. Defense contractors would provide inside information about upcoming contract decisions to James Ashford, who would pass it to investors for a fee. In exchange, certain contracts were steered toward specific companies through influence and manipulation of the bidding process. Millions of dollars had changed hands. Fortunes had been made. Senator Victoria Ashford's name appeared in some documents, but only as the source of information, not as a participant. It was clear from the records that James had been using his wife's position without her knowledge, exploiting her access for his own gain. The evidence was comprehensive. Bank records showing transfers, emails outlining the scheme, recorded phone conversations, documents showing falsified contract bids. It was the kind of evidence that could send people to prison, destroy careers, and rock the foundations of government. But there was a problem. Most of the people involved were still alive, still in positions of power. One was now a federal appeals court judge. Another had become a state governor. The defense contractors were still major players in the industry. Daniel and Sarah sat at their kitchen table, the documents spread before them, and faced an impossible decision. "If we go public with this," Sarah said, "our lives will never be the same. You'll be investigated, questioned, possibly charged with something. We'll be in the news. Emma will have to deal with this at school. Our privacy will be gone." "But if we don't," Daniel countered, "we're letting these people get away with it. We're keeping the same secret Victoria Ashford kept, carrying the same burden." "Is that our responsibility, though?" Sarah asked. "You were just a guy who helped someone bury a box. You didn't know what was in it. You have no obligation to become a whistleblower." Daniel looked at the documents, at the evidence of corruption and greed, and thought about Victoria Ashford standing in the rain, her eyes filled with fear and determination. He thought about the choice she'd made and the guilt she'd lived with. "She gave me this choice," Daniel said quietly. "When she buried this box, when she hired a stranger to help her, She was essentially putting this decision in someone else's hands. She was hoping that someday, someone would find this and have the courage to do what she couldn't. Or, Sarah said gently, she was hoping it would stay buried forever, that she could die with her secret intact. They called a lawyer, but not just any lawyer. Through careful research, they found an attorney who specialized in whistleblower cases, someone with experience handling sensitive government corruption cases. They met in his office, bringing only copies of the most significant documents. The lawyer, a man named Robert Chin, listened to their story and examined the evidence. When they finished, he sat back in his chair and let out a long breath. "This is extraordinary," he said. "This evidence is solid. Could still lead to prosecutions, even after all these years. But you need to understand what you're getting into. These are powerful people. They have resources, connections, expensive lawyers. If you bring this forward, they will come after you hard." Daniel and Sarah took a week to think about it. They talked to Emma, now 16, telling her a simplified version of the situation. Their daughter surprised them with her clarity. "Dad," she said, "you've always taught me to do the right thing, even when it's hard. This seems like one of those times." In the end, it was Victoria Ashford's letter that decided it for Daniel. The line that kept echoing in his mind: "I lived with this burden for years, the guilt of my silence." He didn't want to live like that. He didn't want to spend the rest of his life knowing he'd had the power to bring corrupt officials to justice and had chosen to do nothing. They gave the evidence to Robert Chin, who passed it through proper channels to the Department of Justice and the Senate Ethics Committee. The story broke 3 months later, in early 2020, becoming a major scandal that dominated news cycles for weeks. 2 former senators were indicted. The appeals court judge resigned and was disbarred. Pentagon officials faced civil penalties. The defense contractors paid massive fines and saw executives criminally charged. Daniel's name came out, of course. He was investigated, questioned extensively by the FBI and congressional committees. But because he'd come forward voluntarily and had clearly been an unwitting participant in the burial, no charges were filed against him. The media attention was intense but brief. Daniel gave one interview to a respected journalist, telling the full story of that night in the woods and Victoria Ashford's letter. Then he refused all other requests, focusing on his family and his business. Life gradually returned to normal, or a new version of normal. Daniel's business thrived, actually, as the publicity brought him more clients than he could handle. Sarah remained supportive, though the stress of those months had taken its toll. Emma went off to college, choosing to study law, inspired by her father's experience. In the end, Daniel never regretted his decision. Sometimes, late at night, he'd think about Victoria Ashford, about the burden she'd carried and the choice she'd made. He understood her better now. She hadn't been a criminal. She'd been a woman caught between impossible choices, trying to protect her family while wrestling with her conscience. By burying that box, she'd passed the decision forward, placing it in the hands of fate or providence, or whatever force had led Daniel to drive past that particular stretch of road on that rainy October night. He'd helped a stranger bury a secret. Years later, when he'd realized who she really was and what that secret contained, he'd helped bring it into the light. And in doing so, he'd learned something about himself, about courage, about the weight of truth and the cost of silence. Some secrets, he realized, are meant to stay buried, but others, no matter how painful, are meant to be told. The story of Daniel Torres and Victoria Ashford reminds us that sometimes the most ordinary moments lead to extraordinary consequences. That sometimes doing the right thing means carrying a burden for years until the moment comes to set it down. What would you have done in Daniel's position? Would you have stopped that rainy night? Would you have kept the secret or brought it to light? These are questions without easy answers, questions that test not just our ethics, but our understanding of justice, loyalty, and truth. If you enjoyed this story, please like and subscribe. And remember, the choices we make, even the small ones, echo further than we can ever imagine.